Productive Pastor 54 Kinds of Distraction. Have you ever been distracted? Or maybe the better question would be, when was the last time you were distracted? I'm Chad Brooks, host of Productive Pastor Podcast. It's great to have you on in this episode 50. You know, I probably should be doing something cool for this episode, but this is a one-man shop literally here in my office, 9 o'clock p.m., the night before release. It's been a wild couple of weeks. It's Holy Week, all the things. Thought about skipping this week, decided not to. Realized I need to get out to y'all because y'all are my fam. I mean, it's like where we're at. So I just didn't want to dodge that out. So I realized the last few weeks I've been super busy. I've had to be incredibly focused, and I've been fighting distraction like crazy. And so what I want to share with you this episode is some of the things I've learned about distraction, both from combating it myself, because I am a professional distractioner. I love distraction. I'm great at distraction. I'm great at procrastination, all those things. I've always said I'm not the most productive. I'm just like the worst offender who decided to have a podcast about the whole thing. But also, a lot of this stuff comes up in coaching conversations when I do one-on-one work with you. We talk about distraction a lot. And so if you've ever been in a coaching relationship, you might have heard some of these things, or you might have been the person where inside of the conversation we discovered some of this stuff. So, 4 kinds of distraction. If you've ever said, I'm distracted, we're going to figure that out. We're going to talk about the why. We're going to talk about the how. We're going to dig into distraction in this episode. So let's just kind of throw ourselves right into the primary conversation, get the whole thing going. So distraction's different. And we only find a way through distraction when we have any sort of a permanent sense of understanding where distraction comes from. Stephen Pressfield, the book, The Work of Art, says this. In other words, any act that rejects immediate gratification in favor of long-term growth, health, or integrity, or expressed another way, any act that derived from our higher nature instead of our lower, any of these will elicit resistance. Pressfield talks about resistance across the whole book, and it was that last sentence that grabbed me. Anything, so he's talking about the higher nature of who we are, what we do, any of these things will elicit resistance. And if you've read Stephen Pressfield's The Work of Art, you know exactly what he's talking about here. And so there's 4 kinds of distraction I want to talk about. And 3 of them are related. You know what? They might all be related. I'm not sure. I thought about the ordering of them, and I decided this is how I want to do, the whole ordering process here. But 4 types of distraction. And we're going to talk about what it is, where it might be coming from, but also tangibly, how do we work through this type of distraction? And I also don't think these are clean lines necessarily. These are all kind of interrelated, and there might be some buddy-ups here, or there might be realizing, hey, I'm just distracted in all four of these ways simultaneously, but 4 kinds of distraction. The first kind of distraction, this is the one that might be unrelated. This is the one I deal with a lot. It's called shiny object syndrome. Do you always, you're chasing the next new thing, or you're doing something you should be working on, is important, has to get done, is a priority, all those sorts of things, but instead you want to chase the idea rabbit. Shiny object syndrome. This is where I think shiny object syndrome comes from. And I think certain types of folks are more predisposed to shiny object syndrome distraction than others. Clifton Strength Finders. I love Strength Finders. Use it in every coaching relationship. I think people who, ideation, learner, these sorts of strengths that can be incredibly helpful for ministry, especially just from the content creation side of it, the thinking, the writing, the sermonizing, all that sort of stuff. I think if you are an idea person at all, or you're visionary, you've got that sort of a piece, or you're a high activator like I am. This isn't a podcast about Clifton Strengths, but understanding why this sort of thing happens, all of those sorts of things that predisposes us to shiny object syndrome. It's because we get bored and we love new things. And so what we are doing in that moment is we are chasing energy because new things energize us. Possibilities energize us. The what ifs and the what coulds energize us. And so we get distracted with shiny object syndrome. It's a real thing. So how do we begin working our way out of this? Like always, as questions, we have to begin to realize what our relationship to finishing things is. Sometimes this is where systems come into play, but really it's about this. How can outcomes motivate you more than new things can motivate you? That's really the secret. You have to learn to love finishing things and the satisfaction that finishing things does. That's the best way I know to combat the shiny object syndrome distraction. Number one. Number two, and this is kind of the mother-parent emotion, let's call it that way, the parent emotion for all of the rest of these, but it also might be related to number one. But I decided to kind of put it number two, a lack of focus and lack of clarity. Now, like shiny object syndrome, I think lack of focus or clarity is related to boredom. It's energy. It might be a person who has maybe a different strength set or a different personality, that this is the heavier temptation where you're just bored. This is where apathy comes in. This is where it's good enough comes in. This is where if you're living, and I talk about this all the time in Productive Pastor, if you've been living in reaction mode and not responsive mode, where this is like if you don't know what you're coming in to do that day, you're like, okay, it will just fill up. It will just be there. Back to Clifton strengths. If you lead with relationship building strengths, I think you can struggle with this in some way. And it's a boredom that happens because there's nothing that's making you ask or do big picture, like big question sorts of things. And so the how along it is this. What are you doing and what are you not doing? Now, we're going to talk about that same idea later on coming up, but what are you doing and what are you not doing when you're at this level of bored, of just questioning, of that sort of a thing? Because that's what happens is like when everything becomes everything, this is where this level of boredom just kicks in. I think a lot of times like when we're really tired and we're not aware of exactly how tired we might have been, this is where this comes in. When we're satisfied with like the status quo, this can come in. This is not like you're not chasing something new. No, shiny object syndrome is when you're excited and you always want to be like move, 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 go fast. That sort of a thing. This is very different. This is like, I'm just kind of tired. That's what's going on. Or I just don't know what the next step is. That's what's going on, all this. And so how do we get out of this? We ask ourselves that question. What am I doing and what am I not doing? Episode 14 of the podcast is about personal ministry vision. So much of my coaching work right now with other folks is coming into this plan that I kind of personally outlined in episode 14 of just what does it mean to have a personal ministry vision, to understand, who you are as a ministry leader, as a pastor, at your core. So no matter what you are doing, where you are going, what's going on, this is who you are in a core way. And then in your ministry context and situation you're in right now, this is how those core values are getting worked out. If you're curious about that sort of a coaching, you can go to the link in the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/BPP/050. And there's a link where you can book a 30-minute exploratory call, and we could talk about some of this and look at what does this kind of this side of coaching look like. But I do this with folks a lot, especially if you're hitting middle age and you've been in ministry 10, 15 years, something like that. I think that this is a natural wall, and we've talked about ministry walls around Productive Pastor before. This is a natural wall where we have to begin asking ourselves the questions, what is the future going to look like? And especially after the last few years, can you envision a future that you can get excited about? So lack of focus, lack of clarity creates distractions because we just don't think about what's coming up ahead. And so you see how it's that parent emotion right there. Okay, the third type of distraction we deal with is interruption. But here's the thing. Interruption is a little funny. I work with a lot of pastors. There again, the one-on-one relationships. In a lot of ways, this whole episode is like, this is everything Chad has learned about distractions over the last few years of coaching with folks. But this thing about interruptions, we think that we are interrupted by people constantly. And you know what? We might be interrupted. Or you know what? Sometimes we might have created an office culture that is so just shared, like everybody's up in each other's business all the time, that it's kind of impossible to ever get deep work, focused work done. When I was in seminary and I was working in the chapel office and sometimes running the chapel at Asbury Seminary, the office that the whole staff worked out of was a big, huge shared workspace together. Now, I had a private office that I liked, and then I lost it. After a while, I couldn't have access to it anymore because, a student worker having a private office at the seminary is just, that I was going above and beyond what student workers could get there. But I'll tell you what, it was extremely and incredibly difficult to get like deep work, big things done. When I was in this big shared office, it was also the entryway into the dean of the chapel's office. It's just, it ain't going to happen. So like if you feel like you're literally being distracted that much, you can't throw blame on other people because there's a culture, and there's a culture of working together that might be there. You might have people interrupting you, but you're also probably interrupting yourself. Really the question comes into, where are your interruptions coming from? And what I have found, and what others have found, is it's usually not other people. We are actually really good at interrupting ourselves, but we very rarely know it. So this is how you move out of this idea of distraction. Productive Pastor, episode 2, probably the most like core productive pastor practice that's there. I feel like this gets brought up in like every third episode, but you need to do a time audit. I've got a free time audit resource and worksheet. You can go to the show notes, chadbrooks.com/PPP/050, and you can grab it. You print it out. It's a day sheet, or if you're a GoodNotes 5 person on your tablet like I am, you can just upload it as a template, and you can begin keeping the time audit. But this is the secret sauce of time audits. To understand interruption is I always will write in black ink what my schedule is that day, and I will do a little bit of time block planning, write out my tasks, that sort of a thing, and then I will keep a blue pen with me. And every time I divert from that plan, I will write that diversion down in blue ink. And you know what? Sometimes it's other people. And sometimes those interruptions are completely legitimate, and sometimes they're not legitimate. But 9 times out of 10, what I have found about the distraction of interruption is we are our worst distractors and interrupters. And the time audit will tell you that, it will show you that, and then you will begin kind of working through that, because that's the deal. If you don't have focus, you don't have clarity. Remember, parent distractor, parent emotion. If you don't have that focus and clarity, you're not going to be motivated to like stick to the plan and stick to what absolutely needs to be happening. So interruptions, the third kind of distraction. The fourth kind of distraction is one I think a lot of us, especially in ministry for the last 3 or 4 years, you've experienced, and we can falsify it at times. And what's so important is for us to understand when it's false and when it's true and necessary and needed. And that fourth type of distraction is this. It's true chaos. Okay? True chaos is when things are absolutely squirrely. I'm talking back half of March and April of 2020. Where all the yeses matters and all the no's matter. That sort of a thing. Like every single decision is kind of terrifying you. like that sort of a thing. Like stuff is so bad, you have to respond. So that might happen. Chaos might hit for a moment in ministry when something happens. And it's related to lack of focus and clarity, because when every single thing seems to be coming at you, you have to quickly triage and discern what is mission critical. And when you realize what's mission critical, you only do those things. It's a realignment of situational basics. There's a movie, it's an old black and white war movie. And if you like old black and white war movies, go find it. I'm sure it's streaming somewhere. It's called 12 O'Clock High. It's about a bomber group in World War II that was an absolute dumpster fire, and how the leader came in and just reset everything. I worked with the pastor one time. I was his associate. He was a fantastic leader. He was a fantastic crisis manager. He was a career interim pastor, all these sorts of things. And his favorite movie was 12 O'Clock High. And to him, everything was a leadership lesson. So, of course, I go find the movie, watch the movie, and realize this is a really good leadership lesson, because the basic thing that happens in 12 O'Clock High is it's that the bomber group is a dumpster fire. So he calls everyone back to base. That realignment of situational basics. Okay, when you realize, what is mission critical, and you only do those things. That's it. So the how here is this. You have to declare what is the most important thing for us to be doing. So you define your focus and your clarity. What's the most important thing for you to be doing? And you just do that. I remember, this is pandemic leadership here, friends. This is, like I said, this is back half of March and April and maybe May of 2020. And I remember my wife at the time was working at a Fortune 100 company, and their CEO came in and said, I'm not worried about making the right decision. I just want to make sure I don't make the wrong decision. There will be times when we have to go into chaos ministry and season. And what's so important when we hit in there is just to realize the focus and the clarity piece and how that matters. And just to keep every single person just, situational basics. That's where you live at. So the 4 kinds of distraction, or 4 ways that you can see distraction, you can understand distraction, types of distraction. There's probably more of these, but, let's face it, these are the 4 kinds of distraction for this episode. Remember, number 1, shiny object syndrome. Number 2, lack of focus, clarity. Number 3, interruption. Oh, yeah, I had two songs playing there, y'all. Like I told y'all, single man show. And then number 4, chaos. Those 4 kinds of distractions, I think they're all can be wrapped up together in a tight little bow. But think about this. So if you're distracted right now, take a moment and realize, okay, where am I distracted? Do you need to be rethinking your relationship to energy and boredom? Do you need to be maybe considering doing some personal clarity work? Episode 14 of the podcast is in the show notes. Go to the link. You can do it yourself. 3, interruption. Go hit up a time audit. Figure out what that's like. Or 4, when you actually need chaos level leadership, it's okay to declare it and to just get rock solid clear is where you are. So that's it. Episode 50 of the podcast. Chad Brooks, as always, it's a joy to see you. I love stewarding this community. Come hang out with us on Facebook, Productive Pastor Community. There's over 1,000 pastors there. I call it the Productivity Party. You can also sign up through the show notes to the 515 email. It's a free email course to help you just get quick clarity over your day work schedule if you need to. And then there's Productive Pastor emails. Right now I'm wrapping up a series, 1 more week left on getting out of a sermon rut. And I've been in one, but I'm getting out of it. I'm sharing you the tricks and the tips and the things I've learned inside of that process. And so, as always, it's fantastic to see you. I will see you back on the next episode, and I'll just see you around the internet and other places too. Thanks.